Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all to the eighth edition of CUT CIRC Biannual Conference of Competition, Regulation and Development, which will deliberate upon socially sensitive issues and sectors. This biennial conference is being organized in collaboration with BRICS, Competition Law and Policy Center, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and European University Institute. The session is being streamed live as well on YouTube and Zoom. So all the participants who have any questions can put it up in the chat box. We shall now begin with the inaugural session on polycrisis and social welfare. We request all the panelists to kindly come on stage to moderate the session. The first panelist for this session that we have is Mr. Pradeep Mehta, Secretary General Cuts International, Sri Bhuvaneshwar Kalita, Member of Parliament and Chairperson, Parliamentary Standing Committee on Health and Family Welfare, Ms. Teresa Moreira, Head, Competition and Consumer Policy Branch, Division on International Trade and Commodities. Apart from this, we also have panelists who will be joining us virtually. Mr. Willard Miranda, Director and Chief Executive Officer of COMESA, Competition Commission, Dr. Simon Conan Coffey, Executive Director, ECOWAS, Regional Competition Authority, Dr. Mahmoud Mumtaz, Chairman, Egyptian Competition Authority, Mr. Andre, Deputy Head, Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, Russia, Mr. Victor Oliveira, Commissioner CADE, Brazil, Mr. Harding, Deputy Commissioner, Competition Commission of South Africa, and Mr. Alexei, Director, BRICS Competition Law and Policy Center. Thank you.
A very good afternoon to all of you, those who are here in the hall physically with us, and those who are out there in the virtual world, the cyberspace, and hope that they would be able to participate with us in this event, which promises to be very interesting and very unique, as was pointed out by my friend Alan Asher, who's here, that this is what is a something which we at CUTS always do, is to stay ahead of the curve. And Teresa has also recognized this particular attribute that we have, that we always think about the future rather than the current. And there's already a lot of discussion which keeps on going on in the current context, and particularly on the engineering aspects of competition policy. We look at competition policy in a bigger way, and that is what you will see as a stamp running throughout the event. Let me first of all give a hearty welcome to our Honorable Member of Parliament, Sri Bhuvaneshwar Kalita, who has already been introduced as the chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Health and Family Welfare. And let me add, a very sensitive member of Parliament, who's well aware, tuned to the current happening, and therefore we are delighted, sir, to have you with us on this occasion. And I hope you're able to stay a little longer after the inaugural session. Particularly, the next session is something of your personal interest, is on access in healthcare sector. Having said that, let me also welcome Teresa Moreira, the head of Competition and Consumer Policy Branch, who is not only representing herself, but also the Deputy Secretary General, Pedro, who had expressed a desire to come here. But what had happened was that in the process of G20, which has happened recently, India organized a summit only in last month. Pedro has already been here a number of times, and therefore he felt a little overwhelmed. Willard Mwemba, who's there virtually, the Director and Chief Executive Officer of COMESA Competition Commission. Willard, welcome to you as well. Simon Conan Coffey, Executive Director of the ECOWAS Regional Competition Authority. Welcome to you also, sir. Mahmoud Mumtaz, the Chairman of the Egyptian Competition Authority. Victor Oliveira Fernandez, the Commissioner of CADE. Brazil. Hardin Ratsishu, the Deputy Commissioner of the Competition Commission of South Africa. And and Alexia, we are all three of us old conspirators, co-conspirators. Right? Trying to, in a good, of course, trying to make the world a better place to live in. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this 8th edition of our flagship program, the Kutch CERC Biennial Conference on Competition, Regulation and Development. We've been organizing this program every 2 years since the year 2007, except for 2009 due to some unavoidable reasons. Today, we meet in the backdrop of one of the worst terrorist attacks in Israel, which has killed many innocent people, but has left a legacy that I dread to think of. This reminded me of similar attacks on the Taj Mahal Hotel in Mumbai on 26th of November 2008, which was a similar kind of attack which happened from across the border in Pakistan. Or even the World Trade Center in New York, what is called 9/11, 11 September 2001, by terrorists who flew in from the Middle East. That is again a very unique kind of suicidal attack. So what is actually happening, the underlying message in this is that increasingly suicidal forms of terrorism continue to happen. So I don't know how law enforcement agencies can actually catch them or even punish them. They're not interested in being punished. They're interested in dying for a cause that they believe is their rightful cause. Anyway, let me offer all our condolences to those who are still suffering due to this unfortunate and tragic event in Israel and Palestine. As we speak, the issue is still alive. Also, strife continues in parts of Africa and Europe, which too needs to be condemned. It's not only Europe, which again tends to occupy the global focus, but even in Africa, in many countries, strife continues. People continue to die. This is besides the fact that only yesterday there was another tragedy which took place in Afghanistan, our neighbor. An earthquake led to death of about 4,000 people. But that's for another reason. But the problem is that the innocent and poor people continue to be the victim of politics and the polycrisis that the world is facing today. So the world polycrisis becomes more apt here, considering the fact it is not only economic, but also security and politics and so on and so forth. I pray for peace, which is now at a great premium. Reverting to the subject, all such biennials that we've organized have been an in-person event, except the last one in 2021, the 7th biennial, which is organized in an online mode due to the COVID restrictions. This year, for the first time, we're organizing this biennial in a hybrid mode, in close collaboration with the BRICS Competition Law and Policy Center, Moscow, and in association with the OECD Paris and the European University Institute in Florence. They were also our partners in the earlier events. Every time the theme of the biennial has been carefully chosen by considering, among other things, its relevance to the developing countries, its currency, and connection with the role of competition and regulation in development. This year, the chosen theme is prioritizing socially sensitive sectors. In the last edition, the theme was building blocks for an inclusive and resilient economy, reflecting upon the economic fallouts due to the COVID pandemic. Apart from the pandemic, the threat of which is not yet over, there are a few other crises like increasing climate change-related disasters, armed conflicts, and emerging geopolitics that have profound bearing on economies and global value chains. Let me repeat this sentence once again so that we understand in what kind of dire situation we are in. Climate change-related disasters and including biodiversity disasters as well. Armed conflicts and emerging geopolitics, as we have seen, as I spoke about, whether it's Europe or Israel or what have you, we are in for a very unpredictable time. This is the more serious problem that I see. This has a profound bearing on economies and global value chains. You can't really plan and hope that whatever you have thought of in terms of your production processes will be smooth. Broken supply chains, their abuses, rising inflation, loss of jobs, and decreasing income opportunities, shortages of food and medicines, faltering infrastructure are some of the public pain points that can be attributed to this polycrisis. Taken together, they are affecting our growth and equity. The society in general and the poor in particular are getting adversely affected. The widening socio-economic inequality within and between countries is going against the essence of building back better, a call given during the pandemic. Therefore, there is a need to prioritize socially sensitive sectors and issues such as pharmaceuticals and healthcare, food and agriculture, information and communication, education, jobs, skills, and climate change in policy and regulatory thought processes. If you want to build back better or build back broader, focus on such sectors is an imperative. It should be further noted that in socially sensitive sectors, equity is as important as investment and efficiency. This is something which we've been saying since long, ever since we were established. There are ongoing debates as to how much weightage to efficiency needs to be given by competition authorities in their market assessments. Similarly, construing consumer welfare narrowly to mean consumer gains is also being questioned. Since our establishment in 1983, we've been arguing that consumer welfare is an all-round issue and has to include equity and not just efficiency and lower prices. You have to be also worried about the jobs, whether the jobs are being created or jobs are being lost. Moreover, there are growing voices demanding inclusion of larger socio-economic benefits in competition analysis, especially in the construction of consumer welfare. While there are merits in such arguments, we should note that there are limits to the expansion of competition law interpretations. Our reliance should be more on ex-ante whole-of-government competition policy approach rather than on mere competition law enforcement. This is something which I began my remarks with. What government departments and sectoral regulators can do to promote and maintain competition in markets should be addressed first. I invite your attention to the pro-competition effects of digital public infrastructure, or DPI. Though empirical results will be produced in due course, I have a sense that the efficacy of India's DPI could outweigh the impact of regulation. Ladies and gentlemen, I must tell you that in India we have achieved a huge amount, much better than any country in the West in the context of the digital public infrastructure. Just to give you a small example, there are something like 80 billion transactions which take place through the virtual mode, as against in the US there are about hardly 2 to 3 billion transactions which take place every day. So you can understand the difference that we are talking about. It's all due to the kind of digital public infrastructure which has been established and is being run. Furthermore, principles like resilience and self-sufficiency are increasingly guiding economic and industrial policies, mainly induced by adverse socio-economic effects due to these multiple crises or policy crises. Ensuring food and health security, providing adequate income opportunities, etc., are necessary elements of a resilient society or economy. At the same time, it needs to be kept in mind that competitive markets are resilient markets. The protectionist approach, increasingly undertaken by many countries in the recent past, in the name of making economies more resilient and self-sufficient, is being frowned upon by the competition community. Here I must add that lately a debate on industrial policy has come back, especially after what we heard about in the US, the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act and the kind of other protectionist measures which are being undertaken by many countries. So there is a greater focus on industrial policy rather than to more competition in the market, which is what the WTO symbolized. So one has to understand as to this kind of shifts which are happening. But we still need to address socio-economic issues with the least market restrictive policies and regulations, and by promoting economic democracy, which is now at a premium. This clarion call comes from the G20 New Delhi Leaders Declaration, which happened on September 9th, commits to accelerate strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth. Paragraph 15 of the New Delhi Declaration states, cascading crises have posed challenges to long-term growth. Facing an uneven recovery and cognizant of the need to boost long-term growth, we will implement well-calibrated macroeconomic and structural policies. Now, the problem is that many of these statements are made because they sound good. But if you look at the implementation, then often it is quite poor. I'm being very honest, Kalita sir. We make these, very sort of long, hortatory statements, but then they say we will protect the vulnerable through promoting equitable growth and enhancing macroeconomic and financial stability. You cannot promote equitable growth without having good competition principles in your policies. Such an approach will help resolve the cost of living crisis and unlock strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth. This is quote unquote from the declaration of G20 summit. With this essence behind integral humanism in mind, in the run-up to the New Delhi G20 summit, the Prime Minister of India articulated that the post-pandemic world is very different from the one before it. There are three important changes he highlighted. A growing realization that a shift away from a GDP-centric view of the world to a human-centric view is needed. It's a very profound statement, and if it is followed in letter and in spirit, then it will make a lot of difference. Recognition of the importance of resilience and reliability in global supply chains was the second point which he made. And the third point he makes is a collective call for boosting multilateralism through the reform of global institutions, of which there is a crying need to reform the WTO, which is probably the most potent tool of multilateralism today. With this, let me conclude my welcome address with the welcome you once again to this biennial conference, where we'll be deliberating upon some of the socially sensitive sectors and issues from the competition and regulatory perspective. Life has to go on, and people must be lifted out of poverty by targeting the SDGs, which has set a goal of leaving no one behind by 2030. I thank you very much for your kind attention. May I now invite Shri Kalita to please deliver the keynote address. You want to come here?
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. Good afternoon, friends and colleagues and dignitaries. Mr. Pradeep S. Mehta, Teresa Moreira, Victor Fernandez, Muhammad Mumtaz, Andre Saganov, I'm sorry, there will be a little bit of Hadin Rexid, Mr. Alexei Ivanov. I also welcome you to this millennial conference, which is very proudly being hosted by the Kutch Institute for Regulation and Competition. And I commend the Kutch Institution for Regulation and Competition, CIRC, for organizing this 8th Kutch CIRC biennial conference on competition, regulation and development, on prioritizing of socially sensitive sectors in collaboration with BRICS Competition Law and Policy Center, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, and European University Institute. As rightly mentioned by Mr. Mehta in his welcome address, covering the discussion which we are going to have in this conference, and the theme being prioritizing socially sensitive sector and very rightly been taken, because there are many aspects to this. And Mr. Mehta has mentioned about polycrisis, which was coined in 1993 by the philosophers Edgar Morin and Annie Bridget Can. Used the term polycrisis refers to simultaneous occurrence of multiple linked global emergencies such as economic, environmental, and social crisis. I would like to share some of my thought with you, which will be basically on the health sector of India. And India is no stranger to polycrisis, as it has been grappling with a number of challenges in recent years, including poverty and unemployment, malnutrition, gender inequality, climate change, etc. In the context of India, polycrisis can manifest in various ways with significant implications for social welfare, especially in the domain of health. In policy domain, there are still some concerns relating to health, which are as follows. Threat of neglected tropical diseases such as lymphatic filariasis, Kala-Azar, leprosy continue to pose a significant health burden on some of the most disadvantaged communities in India. And the second, the non-communicable diseases, NSDs, the National Health Policy of India 2017 stipulates the target of reduction of 15% in tobacco use by 2020 and of 30% by 2025 from the baseline levels of 2010. Further, the target for non-communicable diseases is to be reduced premature mortality from cardiovascular diseases, cancer, diabetes, or chronic respiratory diseases by 25% by 2025. Concerted efforts by the government, such as Fit India movement, promotion of yoga, National Tobacco Control Program, etc., are underway to achieve the targets. And this has given results during the COVID pandemic faced globally, and in the particular, the yoga became one immunity raising exercises, which is popular now all over, globally popular now. And India, it is of course in our culture. And secondly, the Fit India movement, which was enunciated by the government under the able leadership of Sri Narendra Modi ji, and to face that crisis of pandemic, to make one fit to face the crisis, to fight the crisis. So those were the priorities during that time, and which we have taken in this country, and we are successful in that. The third thing that I want to mention here is the communicable diseases, because India is also facing challenges in achieving targets of eradication of communicable diseases such as TB. As you all know, WHO has given the target of 2030 for eradication of TB. But our Prime Minister, Sri Narendra Modi ji, has given the target, advanced the target by 5 years, that is to eradicate TB in this country by 2025. So a fast and active program is in operation now by the name of Prime Minister's TB Mukt Bharat Abhiyan. So this eradication of TB is being it has been taken in a large scale all over the country, to the nooks and corner of the country. And we hope that by 2025, India will be TB free. The fourth thing that I want to mention here is, which we have discussed in many a forum, is about front of the package warning leveling. The recently draft regulation of published by FASAI, the Indian organization, that is Indian Nutrition Rating for front of pack nutrition level, is based on a star rating system. This has been considered by the experts across the world as the least effective in achieving health benefits. Leading doctors of India, including pediatricians, endocrinologists, and cardiologists, have demanded that clear warnings on the front of food and beverage packets should be a priority for India to avoid catastrophic public health crisis. However, the effectiveness of the leveling of the food packets has to be reviewed to make it more foolproof, and so that the citizens of the country can make informed decision about what they consume. A number of discussions have taken place in the ministry, as well as in by the social leaders, the public leaders, the organizations like us, and the government is very serious about it. I think some effective measures will be taken very soon. The countries of the world, especially developing nations such as India, need to assess the preparedness to tackle spread of communicable diseases such as COVID in the near or distant future, to be ready to deal with situations of polycrisis. As we have, although we have the entire world has got kind of success after long losses on COVID, but then we have to be ready for future pandemics, which is a challenge. It's a global challenge, not only for India. So I think we should be already on this aspect and study more and make more initiatives on this. Economics of health states that poor health indices can cause a negative impact on the economy of the country. For example, NCDs can impede workforce productivity by elevating rates of absenteeism, diminishing the energy and focus of workers, and depleting critical workplace skills. Conferences such as these will play a pivotal role in enabling policymakers to shape and reshape the policies of the country adequately. These forums serve as think tanks which help in knowledge sharing and brainstorming. I once again thank the organizers of this conference for giving me an opportunity to address you all, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Kalita, for an excellent oration. And may I now invite Teres.
Good afternoon. As Pradeep mentioned, I am Teresa Moreira, the head of the Competition and Consumer Policies branch of UNCTAD, but I'm actually now intervening on behalf of UNCTAD's Deputy Secretary General, Mr. Pedro Manuel Moreno, who sends his regrets, but as Pradeep mentioned, thanks to the lively and successful agenda of the Indian presidency of the G20, a lot of UNCTAD colleagues have been coming to India quite often in the last few months and he took advantage of the fact that he knew I would be here. So I would like to start by sincerely thanking CATS and Mr. Mehta in particular on behalf of the UNCTAD's Deputy Secretary General for this invitation, and take this opportunity to praise CAT's activities and contributions on international trade, competition, and consumer protection issues for 40 years. This year, CAT celebrates the 40th anniversary, and we also had the pleasure of attending the celebrations in Geneva of this organization achievements. I also want to recognize the very relevant and fruitful partnership of CAT with UNCTAD to support UNCTAD's role of making the voice of developing countries heard. And I would like to, considering the current international context, to refer that the agenda of this conference is extremely important and timely. And I would like to quote UNCTAD Secretary General Rebecca Greenspan's recent words. The 2030 Agenda and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals are not just a set of targets. They are a promise we made to ourselves and to future generations. It is the last collective roadmap in a world that is more polarized than ever, a world in desperate need of solidarity and multilateralism. At the same time, SG Greenspan has been often mentioning the current context of cascading crises by nearly every measure, backwards on ending poverty, backwards on hunger, backwards on women's rights, and backwards on development, with only 15% of the Sustainable Development Goals on track, as the recent United Nations Summit on the Sustainable Development Goals in September verified. The latest UNCTAD Ministerial Conference declaration, entitled the Bridgetown Covenant, identified three major global challenges that I believe we all agree with. The first one, reduce inequalities and increase vulnerabilities. The second one, the climate change impacts and the environmental degradation. And the third one, the uneven development of digitalization and the digital divide. So UNCTAD, of course, focusing on international trade and development, but in broad terms that encompass finance, investment, technology, and also competition and consumer policies, underlines that trade has been an engine for tremendous economic growth and development in the global economy, but it has also been fraught with challenges. Global trade, as we know, is undergoing a profound transformation, and the international community together has a role to play in its transformation, a very important role indeed, to ensure that this transformation is inclusive, transparent, and multilateral. Of course, UNCTAD has been recommending a holistic public policies approach, that is to say, a combination of different public policies to address with more effectively the challenges that are internationally faced today. And it is clear that competition law and policies, such as consumer policies, have been actively in addressing some of the major challenges. First of all, reducing inequalities, but of course also addressing the climate change impact, as furthermore it will be discussed throughout this conference, and also, of course, trying to make digital markets work for consumers, to borrow an expression of Professor Eleanor Fox applied here to digital markets. I would finish just with some considerations on UNCTAD's current status, since UNCTAD was launched in 1964 as the voice of developing countries regarding the multilateral trading system, and it is the focal point on competition and consumer protection within the United Nations system, being, as most of you will know, the guardian of the only two internationally agreed instruments in both fields, approved by consensus by the United Nations General Assembly, the UN set of principles and rules on competition in one side, and the United Nations guidelines for consumer protection. UNCTAD also hosts the only global annual forum on both issues, being committed to assist its developing countries' member states to use these two policies for inclusive economic growth and sustainable development. UNCTAD remains committed to working closely with all stakeholders to remake the face of global trade in broad sense in a way that is equitable, sustainable, and just, and to continue working with other international organizations and regional organizations as relevant stakeholders that have a say in how international trade evolves. UNCTAD has the privilege of providing a safe space to convene intergovernmental and multi-stakeholder meetings on trade and sustainable development in broad sense to advance consensus based on the evidence produced by its research and our partners' contributions. The CUTS CIRC conference of today and tomorrow covers all key issues under discussion nowadays, and we are very much looking forward to the discussions and its takeaways, which will be undoubtedly valuable for the ongoing reflection, especially considering that in early 2024, another World Trade Organization ministerial meeting, MC13, will take place, and that in 2024, UNCTAD celebrates 60 years of activity. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the compliments to CUTS. May I now request Willard Mwemba? Willard, are you there?
Good. I'm here. Good morning, good afternoon. Are you able to get me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
What about his visual? Yeah.
My connectivity is very, very bad. So I'm thinking if I put the visual, we may be having an intermittent connection. So if you don't mind, I may speak like this.
Right. No, your voice is very clear. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me personally, and indeed inviting the COMESA Competition Commission to be part of this very, very important event and very, very important topics of discussions, as these are the real issues that are facing the world today. So I'll be very quick. I know I don't have much time, but the COMESA Competition Commission, as most of you may know, is a regional competition authority. It has 21 member states spanning from the southern part of Africa, the eastern part of Africa, and indeed the northern part of Africa. And its mandate is basically to promote and encourage competition by preventing restrictive business practices and other restrictions like anti-competitive measures, but also to ensure that consumers are protected from offensive conduct by market actors in these 21 member states. Now, coming to the topic of discussion or the topics under discussion or areas of concern, the COMESA Competition Commission is equally alive to these issues of polycrisis. Among the things that we have observed in almost all our 21 member states are the escalating and spiking food prices. And in view of that, what the COMESA Competition Commission has done beginning early this year was to commence a study called the African Market Observatory. And in this study, we have our partners called the Center for Competition, Regulation and Economic Development, CRED, which is a unit of the University of Johannesburg. So those are colleagues we've partnered with to research in some of the food markets, and we focused on two. And we focused on these two because they matter most to all our 21 member states. The first one was fertilizer prices. And the second one is the edible oil, vegetable oil, edible oils. And our study has actually been revealing that there's been abnormal increases in prices, unjustifiable. And some of the reasons that the players have been given, especially those involved in fertilizer, has been they've been given the justification of the crisis of the Ukraine-Russia war as a result, or the reason why prices of fertilizer have been skyrocketing. Our research, the preliminary results are showing otherwise. They are showing that while, yes, the Ukraine-Russia war has contributed a part in terms of disruption of supply chains, and indeed other factors, it may not be necessarily true that the margins that we are seeing are as a result of that war. The same is the case when it comes to vegetable edible oils. In fact, when we compare the price increases and trends, including the margins, with one country which is not a member state of COMESA, but is very close in proximity to COMESA, and most of the business is conducted with that country, South Africa, we observe that while there's been an increase in prices there, a steady increase in prices there, the margins are not as high as what we have been seeing in the other most COMESA member states. So that has caught our interest, and we've also seen a number of government, and I should stress here, a number of government policies that are frustrating trade among member states, such that we find that those areas or countries that have abundance in production due to export limitations, they cannot export to those countries that have insufficient supplies. And equally, those countries that have insufficient supplies cannot effectively import due to import bans. And I'll quickly give an example. Zambia, for example, has been producing a surplus of maize and wheat for a good number of years now, I think the last 2 or 3 years. Kenya, on the other hand, has been having insufficient stock of these products I've just mentioned. But the Zambians, what they've been doing in their policies is that the export of maize especially is considered as smuggling. And in East Africa, the Kenyans also are banning the importation of such products in order to protect their small-scale farmers. And we understand the importance of some of those policies. We know competition is not an isolated subject and should be applied together with other policies. But we are just saying those other policies, I think, should be well thought through so that they don't distort the market. So what has happened, for example, is that in Zambia, most farmers are now discouraged to get into the farming of wheat and maize. Why? Because prices are depressed in Zambia. They are low, very low, and they are not given an opportunity to export to countries where prices are high. When we go to Kenya, what has been happening also is that the prices of these commodities are skyrocketing even into other related markets, like the feed stock, feed for livestock, which uses these as an input. We've seen feed also increasing exorbitantly high in Kenya, and just recently the Competition Authority of Kenya actually is now undertaking an inquiry into the prices of feed, livestock feed. And then we've also seen a collapse of some other companies in Kenya that rely on these inputs, maize and wheat, to produce livestock feed because they simply cannot manage to have that stock and cannot survive and can't compete. So those are some of the issues that we are looking at to try to avert some of the crises that we are seeing, especially skyrocketing food prices. And then the last one, probably in the interest of time, I know we have much interactions tomorrow. The last one that we have also observed is the climate crisis, which is affecting all of us in the world. In fact, I'll be quick to say the contributors to this climate crisis to a very large extent are not COMESA member states or even African countries, but countries outside the African continent. However, we are not folding our arms to say there's nothing that we can do. We are only contributing 4% to the global emissions that cause climate change and the like. We are saying we should also be part of the solution. And what we are trying to do for our part on the COMESA competition point of view is that we are now reviewing our law, which is expected to come into force next year. We are reviewing our law and we are putting in issues of environmental protection and climate issues as considerations under public interest, both for mergers consideration, but also for restrictive business practice consideration, with a caveat, of course, on restrictive business practices that green considerations or environmental protection issues shall not automatically give an exemption to undertakings that decide to cooperate in order to come up with technologies that are climate friendly. Those would have to be assessed on a case-by-case basis, because again, we are very careful. We don't want to have them use have that platform for collusion. And then yeah, so as I said, for majors as well, we'll be using it as we are planning to have that as a public interest consideration. And then finally, on the same issue of climate change, we want to have a coordinated approach to all our COMESA member states. So we've begun those conversations with almost all our COMESA member states, and we do hope that the advocacy and awareness that the Commission would be undertaking in that area would result in tangible legislation or at least policies in those countries. So for now, maybe I may end here, and then tomorrow, obviously, we will have much more and further interactions on the other issues that have been raised or that are due for discussion at this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Willard. And what was very interesting about your statement? What was very interesting about your statement was the fact that the COMESA competition law is being amended to take on board climate change issues, sustainability issues. That's very interesting, and it could be a beacon for the rest of the world to look at more closely. Thank you. May I request another virtual speaker, Simeon Kofi from ECOWAS Regional Competition Authority in Banjul. Can you please unmute yourself?
Sorry.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. My name is Simeon Kofi. I'm the Executive Director of the ECOWAS Regional Competition Authority based in the Gambia. And it's my pleasure, and I extend my greetings to all the distinguished participants to this very important event. And all the topics highlighted are very crucial for, I'll say, all the world, and also particularly to sub-Saharan Africa and also the ECOWAS region. I want to thank the organizers of this conference for the invitation extended to ECA, ECOWAS Regional Competition Authority. And also I take this opportunity to really appreciate the collaboration between ECA and CATS International for the work undertaken in the analysis of some of the key sectors that are under review during this conference, including the pharmaceutical and the health sector, and also food and agriculture sector. So my intervention is going to focus on the ECOWAS region. As you may be aware, ECOWAS has been experiencing various shocks with negative impact on social and economic welfare. And it's true that most of the crises and the impacts are common to all, more or less all the countries, especially the developing countries. But the ECOWAS case is peculiar, and I'll come to that during my intervention and also tomorrow, this afternoon. The ECOWAS member states are affected by crisis in two waves. You have exogenous shocks that led to economic disruption within the ECOWAS region. And you have also the domestic policies that are also coupled with the resulting impact of the external shocks in internal demand and supply that also created so many challenges to the region. When it comes to the global crisis, regardless of the source, pandemics, economic and political tension and conflict, by slowing economic growth, soaring prices mainly for fuel and food, this pose a significant threat to the economic growth and then social welfare of the ECOWAS region. Yes, you used to talk of the negative impact of the COVID-19, the persistent impact, but you also in our region, many other outbreaks, health outbreaks. You have various diseases. I will talk about that this afternoon when we will be discussing the health sector and the link with the competition policy in the ECOWAS region. But the situation in our region is more or less exacerbated by the persistence of the inflationary pressure due to, let's say, the linkages between our region and our trade partners outside the region. Inflation keeps on rising in the region, and also it has rose sharply of our average of, let's say, 18% last year, 2022. And the trend for this year and next years are also anticipating the same level of inflation, almost 20% increase. And when you take some countries like Ghana, you have for more than 45%, Nigeria 20%, Sierra Leone 37%. So the situation of the inflation is critical. That lead to some demonstration riots that you can see in the region. And also the food items in this inflation component is critical. For instance, basic cereals increasing from 25 to 40% depending on the type of, and the tension in some part of the world is not helping the situation. You have increase in more than 100% in many countries of the region. So this is a very important issue. When we talk of crisis, the factors that affect the prices in many countries is something that is of concern by the ECOWAS authorities. The previous speakers spoke about climate change. Yeah, it's true. Natural hazard and environmental degradation are also very an issue of concern for ECOWAS region. I think over the past decade, and you can see that the African land temperatures have been rising, And this one in the region affect the more arid region of West Africa. This one can lead to the reduction of cereal crops productivity and the food capacity in the region is actually a main challenge, and many countries are yet to meet future food needs. The agriculture sector, which account for more or less 22% of the GDP, is one of the sectors that are strongly affected by the climate change, and the likelihood of a million of people are exposed for the environmental situation in the region. You have, and this one lead to what you notice in the region: human security, violent conflict, and migration. So we can see that many conflicts opposing farmers and others are, let's say, reported in the region because of this environmental situation. And you have also, for the past months, a widespread floods, drowning, and landslides. You have some building collapsing, and so many issues related to the environmental events. Another important threat and crisis in the region is the violent extremism and terrorism. I think you have a security vulnerability in the region, and many reasons has been brought forward to explain the reason why you can see an increasing situation of coup d'etat, for instance, and the terrorism in the West African region. You have, for instance, poor governance, youth unemployment, abject poverty, social discrimination, and also you have many factors. All these factors are fueling insecurity in the region. So the situation in West Africa is of concern when it comes to security, and there's no one day you don't record cases, incidents of violence and terrorism incidents. So, and these incidents have been rising and reach, let's say, more than 60% this year compared to last year, for instance. So you have also the issue of food security. Many countries of the region are extremely affected by the food insecurity, and you have some cases where you can notice severe emergencies and even famine. So that one is, let's say, exacerbated by the political crisis, the sanction taken against 4 of a member state.
Simin, can I request you to please wind up as soon as possible?
All right, thank you. Yes, I'm going to conclude.
We've got another 5 speakers after you.
Yes, thank you. Actually, there are so many factors when you talk of
your speech so far has covered anything and everything possible.
Okay. So I think the list of crises in the region is quite long, but
yeah, I know.
but
that is something which I said in my opening address.
Yes, cannot,
there are crises. West Africa, okay. Of course, you have what, 4 countries which have had a coup?
Yeah, 4. Yeah, you have for countries, and yeah. But I think if I have to summarize, you have
Please, thank you.
You have all the crises that are affecting the internal and demand and supply. That is to make the, let's say, the price to rise. You have also the political crisis, and you have a climate change situation, and also all these are consequences on the employment, health situation, and many of the social indicators that we can also discuss during my intervention on the health sector and the link with competition. Thank you very much for your.
Thank you very much, Simon. And Mahmoud Mumtaz?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I think, first of all, I'd like to thank GUTS for the kind invitation and the BRICS Center for the kind invitation too. And let me get straight to it. And I think, Mr. Pradeep, in your remarks, I think it's mainly interesting because when you think of terrorism, it's, for me, it has no really nationality per se. And when one should see what are the reasons behind this terrorism. And if you go in depth into these matters, you would see poverty, you would see healthcare, and you'd see education. And
Exclusion is another very important.
Of course. But I mean, from an economic perspective, these are the three areas where competition could act and could help into maintaining stability politically at the end of the day. And hence, I think this is why at the Egyptian Competition Agency, we put these three markets or sectors as priority, which is food, healthcare, and education. And from our government perspective, we took what we see as first of all, the Urdu liberal school, which is protecting competition as a system. And hence, we took a whole government approach by the whole cabinet by approving our strategy, which focuses on 4 pillars. One, effective enforcement, which underneath optimizing market monitoring. So currently we're working on more non-human interference systems, so building a database that builds reports without any need of people writing these reports. This would enhance our resources into enforcement, but these market monitoring are essential to raise red flags into significant markets. Also promoting the effectiveness decisions needs, in my point of view, more cooperation and collaboration with other entities, either national or international. And this is what we also have been focusing on lately very much. And we enhanced our collaboration either from multilateral or trilateral or bilateral. So from a multilateral perspective, we started in March 2022. We initiated the Arab Competition Networks, which is a platform for all Arab competition agencies that work together on enforcement, mergers, and also capacity building of institutions. And this is very important because when you look from a trade perspective, in order to have an efficient trade between member states, you need to make sure, for example, that there's no restriction on passive sales, there is no resale price maintenance, hence to make the consumers benefit from these trade agreements at the end of the day. And similarly, we did something similar in Africa, which we initiated what's so-called the African Competition Heads Dialogue on Digital Markets, which focuses mainly on digital markets and how can Africa have kind of an understanding of the policies, which makes 2 things important. Makes investment easy, to make it clear that our policies are, I'll not say similar, but I see homogeneous in a way. And at the end of the day, it's important to have a clear understanding of common factors of digital markets. The second pillar that we're focusing on right now is promoting, as my friend Willard have mentioned, governments sometimes issue decisions and issue decrees that might hinder competition. And from that perspective, we had a full strategy on what's so-called competitive neutrality and competition policy, which makes two things. One is establishing the higher committee for competitive neutrality, headed by the Prime Minister himself and all the relevant ministers. And from this, the authority is acting as the rapporteur, so we study. So investors can come to us and say, I see that there is a discrimination due to a decree or a decision that the government took. And hence we study that and produce and bring it up to the committee, and the committee take corrective measures either to revoke the decision or even amend laws. And both things have happened already in a couple of cases in the food sector and the petroleum sector. Also, we issued guidelines for government employees, which I would always say we always talk about RIA or regulatory impact assessment. And here we will want to say we need to add another C before that, so competition RIA. And hence this guidelines gives the decision maker steps to go through before issuing a decision to make sure that it's not hindering competition. And here as you can see, we took two approaches. One, for new legislations that are coming up, we need to make sure that they're competitive and they're not affecting markets negatively. And for what's already occurred, there is a way to complain and way to amend these decrees. The third pillar we're working on was disseminating competition culture, because I think in our region, for a long time, the culture was kind of working together and talking to each other and so on. And I think this is common across several other countries. And hence we need to change this mindset. So that's where we started, from the education itself, from schools. And currently we're working closely with the Ministry of Education to include some small tips here and there on competition. And currently working also with the Ministry of Higher Education on including courses, which already took place, I think, in 3 or 4 universities in the economic and legal branches. And last but not least, which is the enhancement of the institutional efficiency, I think this is the most important part to make all of this work, is to improve the workflows. And I think most of our agencies, there is a lot of maybe ineffective things that happens in the middle due to some either legal constraints of evidentiary threshold or some of administrative parts. And here the administrative part is very important to us. And that's why we enhanced our digitization of the institution itself. And this is where we started making those whole case crime management systems. To give you an example of the Polycrisis, we've seen a crisis at the cement sector as an example. So the cement sector, as most of us know, usually known for cartelizing, known for several competition actions that have taken against them, including Egypt back in 2008. But in 2020, due to the COVID and due to the decrease in demand, companies were suffering for quite some times. And here we looked into it from the ordoliberal view, as I've mentioned, and they asked for a reduction of their capacities to make the supply almost near the demand. And here, as we can see, it's for us might be very alarming for a competition agency, because this might tend to increase costs and prices of cement on consumers. But on the other hand side, we studied the market in another way. One, we looked into companies' effectiveness, and these companies are going to run out of business. So on the medium and long term, prices are going to go up. on consumers. So this is one. Second, the number of I would say, companies would hinder the ability to cartelize or lower the risk of cartelizing in the future. And hence, ECA approved the exemption for 1 year at the time, and then it was extended for another year. And what we've seen that there was a positive impact on the market. So capacities, the utilization of production capacities were around 62%. They went up to 81%. The continuity of economic activities, so no exit have been seen in these markets, and even there's entry that have been witnessed of new entrants and maximizing current utilization. So one entrant went up to 90% of utilization of his capacity. And what's important is that this was not, to be very frank, counted into our analysis, but an environmental impact was there because they utilized their profits coming from this exemption to reinvest into environmentally friendly kind of projects such as heat recovery and so on. And you can see that the carbon footprint went down due to these matters. So that's why sometimes, yes, crisis might be very alarming for a competition agency, but sometimes it gives maybe some innovative ways that one can look into competition policy with industrial policy hand by hand, and hence it's important to look into that. So I'll stop here, and thank you so much for your listening.
Thank you very much, Rahul. That was an excellent presentation, and we've learned a lot. I still remember working on the entry of the competition law in Egypt. Your trade minister was the steel mill owner, and he continued to block the competition. Parliamentarian, yeah. But he was quite powerful and kept on looking. And the kind of things which you said, music to my ears. I mean, you've been doing things which we've been advocating since long to India. And happening in fits and starts, particularly your competition policy approach, neutrality, etc., including assessment. And we do a lot of work on that even now, and I have to share that with you. Let me now come to Andre.
My intervention is not about national experience of Russia Federation, because we should spend hours and days to discuss this experience of one country. My intervention is about cuts.
Oh,
yes, yes, really. First of all, I like to thank all of you, Mr. Peter, personally for invitation. I'm very glad to see a lot of common faces here and be here again and participate in this very important inaugural session of the CATS SHOC conference. The Federal Anti-Monopoly Service has been knowing and has been cooperating with CATS and with Mr. Mehta personally, not for years, but for decades. Now, I remember that we met in Paris, in OECD, maybe sometimes in 90s. I don't remember the date, but it's in 90s. And it's one of the most recognized expert organization in the world. It's true, and in global perspective, it continues to play an important role, not only on the national boundaries, but in the world competition and consumer protection community in general. And I want to note that CATS actually is the oldest non-profit, non-partisan, non-governmental consumer protection organization in India. And focusing on consumer protection, trade, economic policy, and very wide agenda, it helps to provide the least advantaged group of population with access to equal rights, amenities, education, food, and developing opportunities, first of all. And 40 years, it's very good age to achieve new excellent result. Talking about our conference, I'd like to tell you just one thing. All of us works for the future. All of us are in intensive discussion on food, healthcare, energy, AI, big data, poverty, sustainability, inflation, employment, non-discrimination, diversity, globalization. All these words are on the top of discussion in any meeting of the members of international competition family. All these topics are in agenda of all national and international events, like in OECD, ICN, and some other organizations. But discussion on this topic here in Delhi on CUTS conference and prolongation of this discussion in the end of this week during the BRICS International Conference on Competition is very important. It's extremely important. Why? Because this is a voice of developing countries, first of all. This is the common voice of so-called collective South. And finally, it's the voice of global South. And it's the voice of millions of consumers. And don't forget that U in CUTS means unity, and T in CUTS means trust. And from my point of view, it's what we are going to do now, to be unit and to be trust. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And don't remember that just in 2 months, we will celebrate together the Day of International Competition Day. Yeah. And the International Competition Day, frankly speaking, is idea of CUTS, of Mr. Mehta personally. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And in the evening, we are going to have a 40th anniversary event, and I hope you're able to say the same things again. I'm very elated, very kind of you to have narrated some of our achievements. Well, to be modest, we've worked in about 30 countries to develop competition laws with none existed. So I just wanted to share that data, which to substantiate what you just said, as evidence of what we did. May I request Victor?
So thank you. And so on behalf of Taji, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference for this invitation and for receiving us so well here in this very special city, New Delhi. So I would like to thank us for having us here. It's a privilege to be here and alongside with such renowned friends in the field of competition law. And I will try to be very brief here, as we are a little bit out of the schedule right now. But I would like to share with you a broad overview about what is going on in Brazil right now and what the challenges had competition policy as well. So I think it's fair to say that the foundation pillars of our competition policy system were set in Brazil during the 90s. And back then, we were facing very strong problems, economic problems around inflation and very high unemployment rates. And back then, I think that the adoption of a competition policy legislation and a competition policy system was saw as a key to overcome these issues. Right now, we are kind of facing these renowned challenges, but I think that we can say that the challenges that are in front of us right now are very different from the ones that have triggered the adoption of our competition law in the 90s. And so the COVID-19 crisis in Brazil have imposed to us the loss of 500,000 lives during the pandemic crisis. And moreover, the pandemic was very tough in Brazil because it was accompanied by some very different problems that we have been facing so far. Disinformation and political polarization was also part of the things that we have been through these years. And all of that put us in a very difficult and challenging position right now. And I think that the title of this inaugural session, the Polycrisis and Social Welfare Challenges, I think it couldn't be more suitable to describe Brazil right now. I think that we now are facing three very different crises, and those crises must be somehow faced by public policies, including competition. So the first crisis, is undeniable, a social crisis. And I think that it's important to highlight that now our employment rate are skyrocketing, and I think that beyond this problem of unemployment rates, we now see new forms of labor platformization and new forms of labor that demands a lot of creativity in terms of competition policy to understand how these new forms of work are rolling out. Second, we are facing a new form of economic issues, crisis, and I think that it's relevant to say that now we are, for the very first time since the 90s, facing two-digit inflation rates, and for the very first time, the number of people starving in Brazil has raised in the last 20 years. So, of course, we have a huge population, such as other BRICS countries. But I think that the main challenge right now is how to integrate this population in food security and how to put the agenda that we have been setting for decades against poverty back in track. And finally, you have an environmental crisis as well. And we are responsible for taking care of the largest forests in the world. And of course, we have a very special position on that. And I think that this three dimensions of crisis, social, economic, and environmental crisis, are now pressuring for rethinking the competition law rules that we have in our country. And I would say that we have maybe three challenges ahead in terms of competition policy. The first one is how to incorporate the social dimension in competition itself and in competition assessment. So, as I said before, during the 90s, we have adopted a very orthodox economic policy in terms of competition. So we have been very and conservative and very cautious in applying our competition law system. So we have been, for the last 10 years, implementing a new system of merger review in Brazil. And maybe because of that, we have been very conservative in our approaches, and we have been trying to prioritize economic efficiencies in terms of competition policy values. But of course, we have a very broad constitution, and our constitution says that free competition is just one of the other values that we should seek in terms of economic order. The second challenge that we have is supporting green transaction to the new economy. And I think that Brazil is now taking part of the global discussions about sustainability agreements. And as we now we are aware, and several European countries are now talking about how to assess sustainability agreements in terms of competition rules and what is the role that competition authorities should play. And I think that it may be time to non-European countries, and Brazil especially, to take a very strong position in this debate and to try to understand how is the proper fit and the proper role of competition rules in assessing green transaction. And finally, we have, of course, the debate about digital markets and what is the future of digital markets. So as it is occurring in several jurisdictions, Brazil is now discussing a new ex-ante regulation for digital markets. The proposal of this regulation is to make digital markets more open and more inclusive. So it is thought to be a system that should be complementary to competition policy as such. But of course, digital markets are a high priority for Brazil, not only for CADE, but I think that the debates about the governance of digital platforms are now of key importance in Brazil, not only in economic terms, but in terms of our democracy. We have a very interesting debate about content moderation in social networks in Brazil right now. So about how to tackle problems like disinformation, fake news, and things like that. So, and I think that proposals such as the Digital Markets Act and Digital Service Act are being considered some sort of models for Brazilian policies. But of course, I think that we have to exchange more views with BRICS countries on that topics to try to understand how our features as developing countries should be considered in this kind of legislations. So I think that that's all I would like to say. I would like to thank you once again for the opportunity. And I strongly believe that meetings like this are very important to expand our preparation and exchange of views with BRICS countries. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. Adam, you are next. And you'll be speaking again in the next session. So would you like to, may I, humble request?
No, thank you very much, and Pradeep, and to Pats really for the 40 years. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And Shri Kalita, it's a pleasure to be here and hearing you, listening to you, especially on issues of healthcare, which we'll be discussing later. And Teresa Moreira, head the competition branch, and of course, colleagues from the competition authorities and representatives of our BRICS Competition Law Center. I say this because this topic, polycrisis and social welfare, when you put it out, I really thought of it, and I think it's quite an important topic to discuss in this context, and especially for developing countries. And I thought, let me share also perspectives from South Africa, because we do have challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Post-COVID-19 recovery, we still have, and I think we have not stopped talking about it because the economy is picking up, but it's not picking up at a faster pace. There's a cost of living crisis, particularly driven by external factors on food, fertilizer prices, wheat, and many others. Thank you. And sustainability, of course, and competition is a main focus of ours. I'll just speak briefly on how maybe competition authorities can respond to this, because it's really a mixture of issues, and it's really complex issues. from a competition regulation point of view, maybe three things we can do. It's promoting competitive markets, through focused enforcement. It's regulating markets with a view to address issues of exclusion. And I think we need to continue working together. So collaboration is quite crucial for competition authorities. And this has been observed, OECD, many places. What have we been doing in South Africa? So I just picked food prices because this is quite a pressing issue for us. So we have been monitoring food prices, as the colleague from Egypt said, and I think this works. So just food price monitoring, assessing the trends, and we're seeing rising trends all the time. And some increases are really not explained, but this has led us to embark on specific enforcement. We've started a market inquiry into fresh produce as an example. But there are many other responses, including cabinet itself, our government looking into this. Now, and I think Teresa spoke about sustainable development goals. And I think this is really the foundation to hopefully assist us in addressing this challenge, because the polycrisis we're facing didn't start yesterday. And I think the honorable member of parliament did mention this. So these are issues that require us, and in South Africa, like many other developing countries, our competition laws have been designed to achieve broader welfare goals beyond the narrow focus on consumer welfare, and this is what we spoke about, Pradeep. But these are issues that we need to find a way to share as experiences as many times as possible, so that they can find expression in as many laws as possible around the world. I think it's good to talk about this, but these issues have to find expression in our legislation. But in conclusion, Pradeep, I say it does seem, though, that these challenges we are facing are the same, whether developing countries or developed countries. The magnitude may differ. If you talk about unemployment, there is unemployment in developed countries. There is inequality in developed countries. There are sustainability issues. Of course, we talk terrorism, but if you look, and I think, Pradeep, I take a cue from you, there are a lot of catastrophes happening, flooding, the kinds of disasters we see that are changing societies. And so this is a challenge, and it's a challenge that all of us need to think about. And at least from competition agencies, I draw from the BRICS Summit. This is a very important starting point, and we have a declaration that the heads of state have agreed to continue deepening cooperation amongst BRICS countries. So we're here in New Delhi. We'll be at the BRICS conference Thursday and Friday. And I also noted, and Teresa, allow me to quote this because I quoted the Secretary General himself, Antonio Guterres. He remarked, and this is my last point, at the high-level political forum on sustainable development, this he said, on 18 September 2023. And I quote, "The SDGs aren't just a list of goals. They carry the hopes, dreams, rights, and expectations of the people everywhere. And they provide the surest path to living up to our obligations under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, now in its 75th year. Yet today, only 15% of the targets are on track, and many are going in reverse. Instead of leaving no one behind, we risk leaving the SDGs behind." These are the words from the Secretary General of the UN, and I leave you with those words. Cuts, you have a bigger responsibilities, even as you move towards the 5th decade of existence. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I was just talking to Andre here that BRICS have 5 members and 6 more have been admitted. So in times to come, it will become BRICS 11 from 5. So, so we have going to have a bigger community. 1st of January next year. I think.
Thank you, Pradeep. And because I know I have about 2 minutes, so maybe I speak from here, not to spend time on moving around. My intervention was named as a vote of thanks, and I think it is like really, and a little bit of remarks. But I want to thank you actually for getting together, and I think it's extremely important these days because we talk a lot about those challenges, and challenges are severe. In very few fora, these challenges are taken seriously. It was mentioned several times that SDGs are not really fulfilled, and they're not going to be fulfilled by 2030. It's quite clear. And in many instances, when competition issues are debated, like at OECD, our partners this day, and other fora, a lot of very, I would say, as dependent type of thinking going on, and we still into this Chicago type of consensus about consumer welfare, about technicalities, about technocratic way of doing things in antitrust, and it happens also because the field of ideas or the market of ideas is heavily dominated by let's say dominant powers of the world. And developing countries do not have so many places to express themselves collectively. We don't have so much of aggregated collective power to speak up and create our own vision, how markets should be regulated, how these social challenges should be addressed. And I think it's extremely important that we're moving into this direction. We're moving and we're gathering together in different places around BRICS countries mainly, and with one exception in Geneva, in Switzerland. And I really thank Teresa for your effort to bring things together from developing countries' perspective, from developmental perspectives, this kind of developing of developmental antitrust. And I think UNCTAD has its finest hour now. For years, this agenda was marginalized and not really noticed in big, powerful places like Paris, OECD, and Geneva was really like considered a little bit, exotic type of discussions going on. Nobody paid attention. No, it's the finest hour for UNCTAD as an institution, for BRICS as a platform, for these institutions like CATS, these advocacy groups, and basically developing countries now have their hands to get rid of, this imposed Washington type of consensus and come up with our own consensus about how to overcome these challenges. Let me just, remind one thing. War is a form of competition by other means, as Lenin would say, actually. And it's very bad that we didn't manage to keep competition contained in the boundaries which would be acceptable, sustainable, and basically
humanistic, civilized. We all inspired by Gandhi when he resisted all the bad things in the colonized, India and basically in very bad world. I mean, you guys lived in a terrible condition, actually, in a really terrible condition. But he did resist with understanding that the form of resistance should not destroy the course. Yeah, means matter. And nowadays, in many instances, with this unilateral type of approach, the powers don't care about means. They just fight to the end without any consideration of what kind of negative consequence it could have. For instance, Willard member was mentioning this fertilizer crisis, yeah, and he referred it to Russia-Ukraine war, which is like a terrible thing itself, big disaster, big catastrophe. But let me just remind that it was not Russia which imposed sanctions on export of fertilizers. Those were like US and European Union. We decided, okay, African countries don't deserve to get Russian fertilizers these days because they thought, okay, we don't let you cheap your fertilizers, we don't let you trade your fertilizers, and that's how we fight with you in some sort of geopolitical conflict. And that actually shows a lot how people don't care about the methods. They're ready to sacrifice all the common goods for sake of immediate gains of certain type. They're ready to destroy the multilateral system of WTO, for instance, because they want to utilize this unilateral trade sanctions. They wanted to achieve immediate goals. They don't care about the whole building, the whole planet, and things like this. And that's why I think it's extremely important to build this new type of consensus that common good does matter, that we have to live in the single and shared, which is our planet, and that's why SDGs matter. So if we come up with this type of idea, with this type of feeling, and if we take it seriously and incorporate into antitrust, then we can achieve something. Then we can build a better future, which would not have so much terrorism catastrophes. Actually, terrorism catastrophes, all sort of this type of disruptions, they would happen all the time. It's not that we can get rid of them completely, but it's a question how we adapt to this environment and how we can change this, consequences of this environment. Provide people, better housing, better education, better, living conditions in Palestine, so that they wouldn't go to kill, their neighbors, because this balance is so enormous. It's enormous. I mean, people living on one side of the wall, another side of the wall, it's disgusting. It's unsustainable in any sense, and you can't. This situation, which happening, very big tragedy now happening in Israel, it actually shows that you can't solve the problem by building the walls. And we thought that by tearing down the walls, making world more united, more connected, more to a certain sense solidarized, in a way, we can build a better future. But then we started to divide it heavily, fragment it heavily, without any kind of reflection on the long term and even midterm consequence. So I think it's a time for antitrust, for competition law to come back, to become more serious instrument for dealing with social issues, as all our speakers were saying today. And I think we can do more, we can do better. And that's very hopeful that we got together for this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rohit. I think a point was made by one of the speakers, which is something which happens in many countries in the global south, that is competition the way forward or cooperation is the way forward? So we'll have to look at that option as well, instead of ignoring the fact that you have to always be, rivalry all the time. But I must, the opportunity to compliment Teresa for the wonderful way she has brought up her competition policy branch over the last 5 or 6 years that we've been working together. In spite of being a Portuguese national, though she has Indian blood, like her prime minister also has Indian blood, and that the kind of orientation she has, shaped her whole branch is something which reiterates the facts which Alexei spoke about in terms of, the developing country interest is quite different. Consumer welfare, Alexei, I've often said, I mean, as I said in my speech, it includes equity and not just efficiency. That's our understanding of consumer welfare and not prices alone. But jobs also at the other end, which the South African law recognizes upfront. So we cannot, I don't know why, even in US there is a debate to stop using the term antitrust and starts calling it competition policy. I think we're making a mistake by calling antitrust again and again. Now, Competition Commission of India erroneously has a division called antitrust, which I could never understand. And I asked them, I said, why do you call yourself antitrust division? You are an antitrust regulator, if at all you want to continue with that American term for whatever experience you have. You're not going to get extra marks from the US government for having used the term antitrust. So please stop using antitrust. Let's stop using it because it's an oxymoron. As Andre reminded us, using our name, trust. So we have to build trust and not continuously go forward with antitrust. I mean, those of you who may not know why antitrust came into being, some other time we'll tell you about it. But having said that, I must endorse your compliment to Teresa, and I've seen it personally, hands-on, the kind of effort that she's put in order to promote developing country interests in the field of competition law and justice. With that, it reminds me, Teresa, it's something which I must take up with Victor. The next G20 summit is in Brazil, and we had done a international webinar where it was resolved by, in fact, it was a direction, it was a desire by Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of UNCTAD, that we didn't do any consumer summit in Delhi, but we should do a consumer summit in Brazil, where you can have a whole day of competition law discussion, because ultimately, I mean, we all know that competition law does lead to consumer benefit. I mean, we cannot be delinking both of them. So it's a challenge to you, Victor, that in front of Teresa, and you can talk to him in Portuguese also to make him understand what we are saying. Make it easy. So with that, I think Alexei is already thanked, but I thought these few important remarks were to be made so that we can continue with this movement as strongly as all of us would like it to. Thank you.